All right, welcome back. Part B of Lecture 13. Today we're going to dive into some theory, some monetary theory. In particular, we're going to talk about bimetallism. Bimetallism. Bimetallism is a currency system in which two metals simultaneously function as currency within a country or a region. In most cases, it's silver and gold. And historically, most areas that have a silver or gold currency have a bimetallic standard. You'll find some gold coins, you'll find some silver coins. This is in contrast to monometallism. Monometallism would be if you only have silver currency coins or you only have gold coins. The benefit of a bimetallic standard is that you have the benefit of having two metals function as currency. This allows for more coins to be in circulation. That's a benefit. But there are some complications with bimetallism. Namely, the ratio in the marketplace between silver and gold constantly fluctuates and has fluctuated throughout history. It will always fluctuate. Centuries from now, the ratio between silver and gold will fluctuate in the market. Now, what do I mean by this? Silver and gold are commodities. And like any other commodity, they have a price or a value. And like all other commodities, that value sometimes is higher or lower depending on various factors. Supply and demand being chief. The silver-gold ratio is the ratio between how much silver will buy how much gold. And it's not constant. Again, it fluctuates throughout history. Let's take a look at some examples. During the Middle Ages, the ratio was roughly 9-1, meaning you needed 9 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. Gold was comparatively expensive. Yes, silver was comparatively expensive. Yes, you needed, silver wasn't as expensive as gold, but you only needed 9 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. Compare that to some of these later ratios. By the 15th century, because there was so much silver mining in Germany and other places in Central Europe, silver became a bit cheaper. And the ratio changed to about 11-1. So silver is a little cheaper than it had been in previous centuries. Then, in the 16th century, as you recall, all of these new silver discoveries in the Americas, at Potosi, also the Iwami mines in Japan, and silver drastically fell in value relative to gold, so that by the mid-17th century, you needed 15 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. In short, again, the ratio between silver and gold fluctuates throughout history and sometimes in very dramatic ways. Here's the issue. Under bimetallism, governments historically have established fixed ratios between silver and gold. They'll fix the official ratio, the legal ratio. They'll put that in law, write it into law, and say X amount of silver equals Y amounts of gold. Okay? In a way, you have to do this. If you have bimetallism, you have to have some sort of legal ratio between silver and gold. The problem occurs when a discrepancy emerges between the legal ratio recognized in law between silver and gold and the market ratio. The two are not always the same thing. Sometimes a government will have a legal ratio, a ratio recognized in law between silver and gold that is different than what the global marketplace or the regional marketplace has given to those two metals. When a discrepancy occurs in a bimetallic system, One metal will be overvalued, the other metal will be undervalued. One overvalued, the other undervalued. Let me give you this example. Let's say that you live in a land, it's a bimetallic system, gold and silver, and the government defines silver and gold, the ratio, by law as 12-1. In this land, you need 12 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold, and that's fixed in law. But let's say a few years later, a major silver discovery is made, and all of a sudden there's lots of new silver in the marketplace, and silver falls in value. So that the marketplace outside of that country, regionally, the marketplace says, it's 13-1. But the government here sticks to the old 12-1 standard. It's in law. Laws are tricky to change, and then you have contracts and all the rest. Well, this means in this example that in this country, silver is overvalued and gold is undervalued. Why is that? In this particular country, you only need 12 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. Yet everywhere else, in surrounding areas outside of that country, you need 13 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. And so silver in this country has a higher price, receives a higher price than it does anywhere else. That means in this country, silver is overvalued and gold is undervalued. By consequence, I told you we were going theoretical for this lecture. I hope everyone's following me. By consequence, silver, which is the overvalued metal, will enter into the country because, again, silver receives a higher price here than anywhere else. A higher price here than anywhere else. And gold, which is undervalued, receives a lower price here than what the market would give it. Gold leaves the country. The overvalued metal enters the country. The undervalued metal leaves the country. This is an example of, again, Gresham's Law. Gresham's Law. And there he is, the man, Thomas Gresham, financial advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. And that law, Gresham's Law, bad money chases out good money. Well, what's the bad money here? In this particular example, the bad money is the silver. Why is it bad? What's wrong with silver? Well, what's wrong with it in this particular country is that it receives it receives a higher value than it really ought to. Receives a higher value than it really ought to, and this money here receives a lower price than it really ought to, than its true value according to the marketplace. And so the bad money, the overvalued money, chases out the undervalued money, the good money, the truly good money. And you encounter this situation where in this country there will be more silver than there is gold. There will be some gold perhaps, but it's going to be pretty scarce as merchants recognize that there is this discrepancy at play. Well, there it is. Undervalued metal flees circulation. The overvalued metal dominates circulation. Let me explain how this works with just an example. All these metals to work with, and what's going on here? What's going on? How does this play out? What do you mean one metal flees and the other metal enters? Why is that? Well, let's take a look. All right, we're going to look at an example. All right, we're going to look at this example. In our example, the legal ratio, we'll say in England. Okay, in England. Again, that's my area of special expertise. Excuse me. The legal ratio in England. Let's say it's 11-1. 11-1. The market rate in Europe, so regionally, it's 12-1. What does this mean? This means that in England, silver is overvalued and gold is undervalued. All right, well, what happens next? Let's take a look at this example. Silver is overvalued, and the merchant figures this out. Wait a second. There's money to be made here. I can, the merchant says, exploit this situation. The merchant, because gold is undervalued, will buy 100 ounces of gold in England, so this is an English merchant, buy 100 ounces of gold, and he'll pay the 11-to-1 ratio. Just needs 1,100 ounces of silver. So 1,100 ounces of silver, and now he has 100 ounces of gold. He then exports that 100 ounces of gold, takes it to continental Europe, where the ratio is 12-to-1. Not 11-to-1, 12-to-1. He then sells that 100 ounces of gold for 1,200 ounces of silver. That's more silver than what he started with. That's 100 more ounces of silver. Does he stop there? Oh no, he does not stop there. He then takes the 1,200 ounces of silver, returns to England, and then buys more gold. This time he's able to buy, because the 11-to-1 ratio, and he has more silver than the first step. He buys 110 ounces of gold. The merchant now takes that 110 ounces of gold, sends it to Europe, and he's able to buy 1,320 ounces of silver. Guess what he does? Brings it back to England and is able to buy 120 ounces of gold. Takes that 120 ounces of gold, ships it to Europe, and on and on and on and on. There were merchants in the early modern period who made a living doing things like this. Now, a lot of it was illegal, but they did it anyway if they could get away with it. Let's do the flip example. Let's say, we'll say the market rate in Europe will still say it's 12-to-1, and then we'll say maybe the English Parliament overreacts and says, oh, we need to stop this. Let's change the ratio, but they overreact and change it to 13-to-1. Well, now, what's happened? Silver is undervalued in England. See how bimetallism causes problems? Silver is undervalued in England, and gold is overvalued in England. What does the merchant do? Well, the merchant figures this out and says, aha, all right. Merchant takes 100 ounces of gold, and with that 100 ounces of gold, according to the legal ratio in England, he buys 1,300 ounces of silver. All right, so he's got 1,300 ounces of silver. He ships that silver to Europe, and with that silver, buys 108 ounces of gold. Returns to England with 108 ounces of gold, buys just over 1,400 ounces of silver, exports that 1,400 ounces of silver back to Europe, buys 117 ounces of gold, then he brings it back to England, is able to buy just over 1,500 ounces of silver, and repeats the process, right? Except now it's just in the opposite direction, or is working with the opposite metal. In this case, gold is overvalued, silver is undervalued. See how this is this is a system that if you're a crafty merchant or an especially gifted merchant, you can take advantage of something like this, and it has a big impact on the currency of a country. If one metal is particularly overvalued, it will dominate the currency of that country. And so this is can be a big deal for an economy. Let me give another example of how this worked. Remember when we were in the previous lecture, Lecture 12, when we were talking about the global silver trade. Why was it the global silver trade and not the global gold trade? Well, one of the reasons was because silver was heavily overvalued in India and China relative to Europe. By the 17th century, here's the prevailing ratio between silver and gold in Europe, 15 to 1. You need 15 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. In India, it was only 9 to 1. And in China, it was only 7 to 1. So you have this situation where in India, China, silver is very expensive. And silver fetches a very high price. And so if you're the East India Company, or if you're a European merchant, you're not shipping gold to Asia because gold is relatively cheap. You're shipping silver. There's a picture of the rupee. You're shipping silver to India and to China. So there are all sorts of problems involved in this, and eventually Britain supposedly solved the issue by intentionally overvaluing gold. This was in the early 18th century, intentionally overvalued gold, but just slightly, and reserved silver for small change. So in England, it was mostly a gold currency with silver as small change. So if you read Charles Dickens or any of the other great British authors, you'll hear them talk about shillings. Those were silver, but they were the equivalent of spending a few dollars in our economy today. Gold was slightly favored intentionally by the English mint, so that Britain, beginning in the 18th century, even though technically it was on a bimetallic standard, and even though technically the pound sterling was defined in terms of silver, the intentional overvaluing of gold placed Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries on what you could say was a de facto gold standard, where most of the heavyweight currency is going to be gold, and silver is regulated to small change. So anyway, I told you it was going to be a little theoretical for this part of the lecture, but I think you can see how this had a big impact, a large impact on the economy. And we'll see bimetallism later in this course when we get to the United States, to U.S. history, because there are moments in U.S. history. We'll see the big ones in the 1890s. But from the 1870s through the 1890s, this question, believe it or not, of bimetallism was one of the most explosive political topics in American politics. Believe it or not, it was. And we'll see why. And it's quite an interesting story, but this is our introduction to that idea. All right, we'll leave there. And I hope I will see you next time for Lecture 14.